Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and I recently made a video talking about how I'm planning on selling the TRX at the end of the year, and a lot of people got confused as to why I'd sell the TRX over the Ford Raptor, and so I'm basically going to explain why I think the Ford Raptor is a superior truck. Before getting the video though, as always, if you want to save time and money the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And also, if you're not subscribed already, I'm going to be giving away $1,000 to one of my subscribers once I hit that 250,000 subscriber mark. So it's free to subscribe, do it, you have a chance of winning $1,000. Let's get into the video. Okay, so quick rundown on the trucks. This is my 2021 Ford Raptor with the 37 Performance package. It's the new body style Raptor, and I've got about, you guys can see 70, if it will focus there, 7,500 miles on that truck. And then this is my 2021 Ram 1500 TRX. Doesn't have any fancy package name, it's just a TRX. And I might have to, oh, there we go. You guys can see over 15,000 miles. So I have like twice as many miles on the TRX as I have on the Raptor. Now I purchased the TRX first and the Raptor second, even though they're both 2021s. So I got the TRX in February of 2021, roughly. And then I got the Raptor in like, I think November of 2021. So I got them in the same year, just, you know, this was at the end of the year, whereas this was at the beginning of the year. Now, although both of these trucks are intended for the same thing, which is high-speed off-roading, they go about it in a completely different way. You've got the TRX, which is all about brute force, right, with its 700 horsepower Hellcat powertrain, and then you got the Raptor, which is all about precision, and that's why it uses a dinky little twin-turbo 3.5-liter V6. I think a really good comparison with both these vehicles to two on-road cars is actually the 911 GT3 RS and the Ford Mustang Shelby GT500. The TRX is like the GT500, whereas the Raptor is like the 911 GT3 RS. Both of those cars actually have pretty similar track times, but again, they go about it in a completely different way. With the Shelby GT500, again, like the TRX, it has tons of horsepower, and it's a pretty heavy vehicle, but it gets around that via the horsepower, the brute force, and it has crazy advanced suspension and shocks to make it so that it can handle way better than it should, again, given the weight. And the TRX does a very similar thing off-road. Now, the Raptor, on the other hand, just like the 911 GT3 RS, is lighter weight. And so it's all about precision, and so you get a ton of speed through the corners, and even though you're not punching out of the corners quite as aggressively as you would with the TRX/Shelby GT500, the speed that you carry through the corners and the fact that you don't have to brake as early makes it so that you can go just as fast on off-road courses. And again, I did an off-road race with both of these trucks, and despite what people have to say about that race, the TRX was slightly slower than the Raptor, and it just goes to show how well engineered the new Raptor is. Now, if you look at the official release dates with both of the trucks, it makes sense as to why the Gen 3 Raptor is slightly better off-road compared to the Ram TRX. It's because the Gen 3 Raptor was released after the TRX, right? The Ram TRX benchmarked the Gen 2 Raptor in terms of what it needed to beat from an off-road spec perspective. And then the Gen 3 Raptor did the same thing, but with the Ram TRX. And so Ford just made it so that every single bit on this truck beat the Ram TRX from an off-road perspective, despite the fact that it has significantly less power compared to the Ram TRX. And this becomes very apparent when you look at the off-road specs. So with the standard Gen 3 Raptor, you have 12 inches of ground clearance with the 35-inch tall tires. With those 35-inch tall tires, you have 14 inches of travel in the front and then 15 in the rear. Now with the 37-inch tall tires, which is what I have on my truck, you have 13.1 inches of ground clearance, and then you've got 13 inches of travel in the front and then 14 inches of travel in the rear. You compare that to the Ram TRX, and the Ram TRX has 11.8 inches of ground clearance. So a Raptor with 35-inch tall tires has more ground clearance than a TRX, and a Raptor with 37-inch tall tires has way more ground clearance than a Ram TRX. And then if you look at travel numbers, the Ram TRX has 13 in the front and 13 in the back. So a Ford Raptor with tires that are the same size as the TRX, 35s, has way more travel than the, well, I shouldn't say way more, but has more travel than the TRX. And then a Raptor with 37-inch tall tires has as much travel as the Ram TRX. And so the Raptor is winning on all fronts, whether you go for the regular 35 package or the 37 package. You're gonna have the same amount of travel, if not more travel, and you're gonna have more ground clearance on both fronts. And it goes beyond just pure ride height with both of the trucks. If we look at the suspension shock setup with the TRX, we've got the Blackhawk shocks from Bilstein. It's their most advanced system ever. It's an active terrain system. And then we have a multi-link system here in the back. We also have a solid rear axle independent front suspension. And then popping over here to the Raptor, well, you guys can see we've got Fox's most advanced shocks ever. It's a live valve system just like the TRX, and we have a multi-link setup in the rear. Solid rear axle, independent front suspension. Sounds pretty familiar, right? Now this is where things get very shocking. I had to make the joke. So the shocks, they could not be more different from each other. Even though they're both live valve systems for off-road trucks, they perform at a completely different rate. And I've noticed this difference between other vehicles with Fox shocks and with Bilstein shocks. And this is part of the reason, by the way, why I review so many cars, so that I can kind of like dive in and figure out things that a lot of automotive journalists just don't have a chance to figure out, because frankly, they just don't review enough cars on a yearly basis. And so here's the deal. Here's what I found out with Bilstein shocks. What I found with Bilstein shocks is they're pretty stiff with initial compression. It seems like they don't want to give anything with initial compression. But once they get past that initial compression, then they give quite a bit. And so what that actually transfers to when you're driving a vehicle with Bilstein shocks is you feel like the handling is really solid. Like the vehicle doesn't track all over the road or anything like that. It just stays where it's supposed to stay, and it feels like it just corners really, really solidly. And it's just an amazing thing for on-road performance. But what you also notice is little bumps and everything in the road, and especially if you go off-road, little rocks and everything, you feel them. It makes the vehicle shake, and like you feel everything that is happening under the vehicle. Now, compare that to Fox shocks, and what I've noticed, and this is just not with the Raptor, this is with like every single vehicle that I've driven with Fox shocks, is they kind of have a different approach. It seems like they give up a little bit of compression all the time. Now, what this does on the negative side of things is it makes it so the vehicle can sometimes kind of track all over the place on road. But what it also does is it completely like deletes little bumps and little rocks when you're just driving on road, and then also when you're driving off road. You don't get the weird shaking, and you don't really feel any of that. It gives you a much more comfortable and compliant ride. Now, what I will say is, through big compression with both shock systems, they feel pretty similar actually. I've jumped both of the trucks, and it seems like, you know, upon landing and everything, again with bigger compression, they both feel just as smooth. So the biggest difference is just that initial compression, where Bilstein seems to stay really like firm, whereas with the Fox shocks, they give up a little bit. So basically, Raptor, you're gonna have a little bit more of a compliant ride, but it is going to, I guess, make the handling technically slightly worse. Whereas with the TRX, you're gonna have a less compliant ride. You're gonna feel what's happening on the road quite a bit more, but then you're gonna have slightly better handling, technically. Now, everything that I just mentioned is quite surprising because, again, both vehicles have active shock systems, which technically should be able to do both things, right? They should be able to be firm and stiff when they need to be, right, when you're driving sporty on road, but then also like smooth and compliant when you're driving off-road, when you're going to be having little bits of compression and large bits of compression. And you can even see that, like here's with the TRX with the drive mode select. So notice we're in auto, and you guys can see with the suspension, right, set to street. And if I go to sport, set to sport. And if I go to Baja, set to Baja. But here's the deal. In actuality, and I'll show you guys the system over on the Raptor as well, in actuality, this just always feels stiffer compared to the Raptor with initial compression. Even in Baja mode, it doesn't give up as much as what you would think it would give up in the off-road mode. Now with the Raptor, we can actually just change the shocks. We don't have to change the drive mode. So we have a normal mode, which is like your regular street driving, right? You've got a sport mode, and then you have an off-road mode. Now, the thing that I've noticed here with the Raptor shocks is it doesn't really, I mean, it does change things when you're in different modes, but it doesn't really matter what mode you're in terms of that initial compression. It seems like it always gives up a little bit more compared to the TRX. And so little bumps and everything in the road, you don't feel them as much in the Raptor, even when you're in sport mode, which I drive this truck with the sport, or I should say sport damper mode rather. I drive it with the sport damper mode most of the time. And so, yeah, also this is another thing with the trucks. You guys can see 15.9. Even with the snow mode with the TRX, because I'm at such high elevation, I still seem to be averaging like 10 to 12 miles per gallon, 12 miles per gallon on a good day. I don't know what it is. It just, it doesn't like to get good fuel economy. It's not like it has a big supercharged V8 under the hood or anything with 700 horsepower. It's not like that's happening. Now, the next thing to look at is going to be the weight of the vehicle. So all you have to do to figure out the weight of your vehicle is take the payload capacity, 1,304 pounds, and then take the gross vehicle weight rating, 7,300 pounds minus those. So that basically means that this truck is slightly under 6,000 pounds for the total weight with fluids and everything. Now compare that with the TRX. You guys can see 1,034 pounds of payload and then gross vehicle weight rating, 7,800 pounds. So this truck essentially weighs quite a bit over 6,700 pounds. Now, weight and fuel economy are very important for both on-road and off-road driving, right? First off, fuel range. From the fuel economy perspective, the Raptor has so much more fuel range. It actually has a bigger fuel tank too. The Raptor has a 36-gallon fuel tank, whereas the TRX has a 33-gallon fuel tank. So the Raptor gets better fuel economy and it has a bigger tank, so its fuel range is significantly higher than the TRX. The TRX, I'm lucky to get like 300-ish miles on a tank, whereas the Raptor, I can pretty much always get 500 miles on a tank, 200 miles on a tank of gas. I mean, it's a huge difference, especially when you take into account off-roading. And then on top of that, weight, it's important for both on-road and off-road use. The TRX, you can feel the weight a massive amount. When you go around corners and everything, you really feel like you're lugging something. Whereas the Raptor, again, it feels like more of a precision-based tool, and you feel that off-road as well. And so it makes you feel more confident with the Raptor when you're going around corners. Now, like I said, the shock setup on the TRX is slightly stiffer than the Raptor setup, and so it helps out with the handling. That truck handles way better than it should, despite the massive amount that it weighs. Bill Stein did an amazing job with the shock tuning, but like I said, because it has that great handling, it doesn't feel quite as comfortable and compliant. And the last thing is pricing. This truck stickered for about $82,000, and then this truck stickered for about $95,000 brand new. So there is a $13,000 price difference between both the trucks. Now, if we look at the real market, there are dealerships selling TRXs at MSRP. Apparently, there are some selling it under MSRP. And well, there are some Ford dealers selling Raptors at MSRP, but most Ford dealers are selling them over MSRP. And so when you look at real market values on both the trucks, they're actually both selling for about the same amount of money. And in that case, TRX is definitely the way to go. But, and the big but is, if for some reason, some way, somehow you can actually get a Ford Raptor at MSRP, I think it's the way to go. Now, before I close off this video, I do want to mention that both of the vehicles are extremely closely matched, and if you buy one or the other, you're not going to regret your purchase decision because they are both a blast to own. A lot of the differences with the trucks in terms of which one's better over the other come down to personal preference and just what you're going to be using the vehicle for. And frankly, what I use the Raptor for and the TRX for is daily driving and off-roading, right? I use the trucks as they were intended to be used, and here's the deal. Because of how many miles I drive, fuel economy is very important to me. And so getting, 5 to sometimes 6 miles per gallon better in the Raptor compared to the TRX is a huge deal, especially with how expensive gas prices are in today's world. They're both pretty much just as comfortable as each other from an on-road perspective. I will say, because I have the 37 package, the Raptor seats, they come with that package, are firmer than the TRX seats, so the Raptor might not be as comfortable for some people from a seat perspective, but you can get leather seats in the Raptor that are just as comfortable as the TRX seats. And then from an off-road perspective, again, this comes down to personal preference. If you just want to go out into the desert quickly and just hammer down and have a blast and maybe hit some jumps and whoops and everything, the TRX will absolutely be able to do that, and you will have an absolute blast doing it. But on the other hand, if you just want to go out and, maybe do some high-speed jumps and off-roading and all that kind of stuff, and also just explore for a long time, which is what I like to do when I go off-roading, then the Raptor edges out because it has so much more range off-road. Again, the TRX has like 300 miles roughly of range on-road, maybe a little bit more, and then off-road, you're down to like 200 miles, whereas the Raptor, you still have like 350 to almost 400 miles of range off-road, and so you can just go so much farther with the Raptor compared to the TRX. But with everything taken into account, the Raptor just makes slightly more sense compared to the Ram TRX. That being said, like I've said in prior videos, I think the TRX is the one to keep long-term because that powertrain is so special. They're gonna be getting rid of that powertrain in the near future. I also think the TRX is frankly just going to be a more reliable vehicle long term. Bill Stein shocks are just incredibly reliable, and that truck has just been bulletproof for me. And so if I was going to keep one of these trucks for the next 10 to 20 years, yeah, the TRX would be the one to keep because it's actually going to be worth a significant amount of money, I'm sure. And then on top of that, it's actually going to last. Now, I'm not saying that the Raptor is going to fall apart. I just think the TRX is going to be slightly more reliable. But also, that being said, if I'm being honest with myself, I'm not going to keep a vehicle for 10 to 20 years. I thought that potentially I could do it, but with what I do for a living, being an automotive journalist, there's like no chance of that happening. I get a new vehicle every like 6 months to a year to sometimes 2 years. I mean, I've almost had the TRX for 2 years at this point. And so if I'm just being honest with myself, like I like to test out new vehicles. I like to own new vehicles and obviously make videos on them. And so if I want to continue that trend, I can't collect the vehicles, which is very sad for me. But at the same time, it's also very exciting to constantly like get new vehicles and just test them out and see what they are made of. And so, yeah, I just at this point, the Raptor makes slightly more sense. And so there you go. Now that's pretty much gonna sum things up for today's video. And obviously, you know, the plan is to do that towards the end of the year in terms of getting rid of the TRX, but plans always change, so you never know what is gonna happen. So, you know, maybe at the end of the year, it just doesn't make sense to get rid of the TRX and I end up keeping it. Who knows? We will see when everything happens. But as of right now, I have picked the Raptor over the TRX. Let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this and which truck you'd pick. I feel like a lot of people are gonna say Ram TRX because of the engine, but it's like, if you took that engine and put it in the Raptor, which is pretty much what the new Raptor R is gonna be, that would be the craziest, best truck ever. And so I'll leave on that note. I'll see you guys.